The laughter was louder than the clinking of glasses. Maya's voice carried through the dining room, sharp as a knife wrapped in perfume. "Oh, please," she said, waving her wine glass toward me. "You're just a filthy old man living off your son's paycheck." Her words froze the table. Evan's smile faltered. For a second, all I could hear was the hum of the chandelier above us and the faint scrape of silverware being set down. I looked at her perfect hair, perfect dress, that triumphant smirk. And for the first time in years, I said nothing. I just smiled. She leaned back, delighted by her own cruelty. "You think you're still in control, Richard? You don't even know how modern finance works. Maybe you should leave the numbers to people who actually understand them." She sipped her wine, confident, glowing in the attention. I put my glass down carefully, making sure it didn't tremble. "Maybe you're right," I said quietly. "Maybe I'm just outdated." My son shifted in his chair, uncomfortable, but Maya had already moved on to another story about her latest business venture. I listened, calm on the outside, while something cold and deliberate began forming inside me. Dinner went on, as if nothing had happened. Evan tried to fill the silence, asking about work, the weather, the new Tesla she'd been talking about for months. She interrupted him every time, talking over his words, performing for her parents, like an actress on stage. I studied the way she moved, how easily she commanded the room, how even her laughter sounded expensive. My hand stayed folded on the table. 58 years of discipline doesn't vanish because someone half your age thinks she's clever. When dessert came, she made another comment, light but cutting. "You should try this tiramisu, Richard. It's imported. Probably costs more than that old jacket you love." Her parents laughed politely. Evan glanced at me, eyes full of apology. I smiled again, the same thin smile that had unnerved auditors and executives for decades. "You have good taste," I said simply. She didn't realize she'd just handed me the line that would come back to haunt her. After dinner, everyone gathered in the living room. Maya scrolled through her phone, showing off photos from a recent charity gala. "We raised over 50 grand in one night," she bragged. "I handled all the transactions myself." You wouldn't believe how easy it is when you know how to move money. The irony almost made me laugh. I kept my expression blank, the way I used to in board meetings when someone was about to hang themselves with their own arrogance. Evan refilled my glass of water, avoiding my eyes. He was a good man too, trusting, too kind, and I hated how she used that against him. Later, when everyone was distracted, Maya leaned closer, her perfume too sweet, her voice low and full of venom. "You should stay out of our finances," she whispered. "It's not your world anymore. You don't make the rules." I met her gaze, steady and quiet. "You're right," I said. "But remember, money moves in silence." She frowned, confused, and turned away. She didn't notice the look in my eyes, not anger, not hurt calculation. When I stepped outside, the evening air was cool, clean, and sharp. The laughter from the house followed me out the door like a ghost. I stood on the porch for a moment, looking at the soft glow through the windows, the life I had helped build, now turned into someone else's stage. My son's voice drifted faintly through the glass, patient and small. He was apologizing for me, I could tell. My jaw tightened. It wasn't his fault. Maya had been sculpting this narrative for years, me as the old stubborn father, clinging to relevance while she modernized everything. It was easier to make me the fool than admit what she really was, a woman who couldn't stand not being in control. I walked to my car slowly, the crunch of gravel under my shoes almost soothing. My reflection in the window looked older than I felt. Grayer hair, deeper lines, but the eyes were still the same. They'd seen numbers lie, partners, cheat systems collapse. And now, they saw through her. I opened the door, paused, and looked back at the house. For a moment I thought about going back in, saying something, anything, to defend myself. But no. Let her laugh. Let them all laugh. Tomorrow would be quiet, and that's when the truth would start moving. Driving home, the city lights blurred past each one a tiny pulse of memory. I thought of my late wife, Eleanor, her steady hands balancing our checkbook at the kitchen table. She'd loved order, fairness, the comfort of knowing where every dollar went. "Don't let pride make you blind, Richard," she used to say. "Numbers always tell the truth if you know how to listen." That voice returned to me now, clear and calm like the night air. By the time I reached my apartment downtown, I already knew what I'd do. I made tea, sat by the window, and looked out at the skyline. Seattle glittered like a spreadsheet, rows of lights, columns of lives, all adding up to something only the observant could see. I took out an old notebook from my drawer, the one I hadn't touched since retiring. On the first page, under the faded ink that once read Financial Planning, I wrote a new title, The Game. Underneath, I wrote the first line, Step 1. Know where every dollar goes. I tapped the pen against the page, thinking of Maya's words. Filthy old man, outdated, irrelevant. She'd forgotten one thing. Old doesn't mean obsolete. It means patient. It means I've played this game longer than she's been alive. And in the end, the quiet player always wins. I closed the notebook, set it beside my cup, and exhaled. The night outside was silent, but my mind was awake, alive with numbers, patterns, and plans. She thought tonight was the end of something. She had no idea it was only the beginning. The rain had started by the time I left their neighborhood. Seattle rain, thin, cold, endless. I walked the first few blocks before even realizing I hadn't opened my umbrella. The chill helped. It kept my mind clear, my anger quiet. Cars passed by hissing on wet asphalt, but I barely noticed them. I could still hear Maya's laughter echoing from dinner, the way she'd said, "Filthy old man," like it was a joke everyone had been waiting to hear. I wasn't angry anymore, not really. Anger burns out fast. What stayed was something colder, something closer to focus. By the time I reached my apartment building, the rain had soaked through my jacket. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking under my weight. Inside, everything was as it always was, neat, quiet, predictable. My apartment never changed. The old brass clock ticked softly above the bookshelf. The smell of paper and tea filled the air. I hung my coat, made myself a cup of Earl Grey, and sat down at the small wooden table by the window. The city outside blurred under the drizzle buildings, fading into the gray. For a moment, I almost felt peace. Then her voice returned in my head, sharp, dismissive, cutting through the quiet. "You don't make the rules anymore." Maybe not. But I'd spent 30 years learning how rules were written, bent, and broken. I wasn't planning a fight. I was just reclaiming order. I opened the drawer beside me and pulled out an old photo frame. Eleanor smiled from inside it, sunlight on her hair, her hands holding little Evan in front of our first house. We'd bought that place with nothing but savings and stubbornness. She'd been gone 7 years, but nights like this made it feel like 7 days. "You'd hate her arrogance," I murmured. "But you'd tell me to be smart. Always smart." I set the picture down and reached for my laptop. It took a moment to boot up. It was old like me, but it still worked. On the screen was the same spreadsheet I'd opened 100 times before Evan's company accounts. I'd helped him set them up years ago, back when he first started Harlow Tech. My name was still somewhere in the system, buried under permissions and updates. He probably didn't even realize it. I scrolled through the columns, following transactions I already knew by heart. Supplier payments, project budgets, occasional deposits, labeled family support. That last one made me pause. Family support. I clicked through. The recipient wasn't Evan. It was Maya. Multiple transfers, small but steady, each marked household reimbursement or medical assistance. I checked the dates once a month, like clockwork. I rubbed my temple, remembering all the times Evan had told me Maya's family's struggling right now, Dad. It's just until things get better. Things never did get better. I leaned back in my chair, the old wood creaking beneath me. I'd always believed helping family was a duty, not a favor. But duty turns into exploitation the moment trust goes one way. My tea had gone cold, but I didn't move. I stared at the numbers until they started to feel like words, sentences of deceit written in decimal points. A faint buzzing pulled me out of it. My phone lit up on the table. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Richard Harlow," I said. "Rich, it's Tom Henson," came a familiar voice. For a moment I was back in the old office spreadsheet, arguments, late-night audits, the smell of burnt coffee. "Tom," I said, smiling despite myself. "Haven't heard that voice in a while." He chuckled. "I heard about your daughter-in-law. My niece works at that bank branch she uses. Thought you'd want to know, her name's on a few business accounts. Big movement lately." The words hit like a pin dropping in an empty room. "Business accounts?" I asked slowly. "Yeah, multiple. Some under her name, some under shell entities. Nothing illegal yet, but suspicious." I glanced at my laptop screen, the glowing columns of numbers. "Can you send me details? I can try," he said. "But keep this between us. She's been throwing money around town, like she's printing it." After the call, I sat there in silence. Rain tapped on the window like a metronome. "Printing money," I repeated softly. My mind began connecting the dots, the sudden designer handbags, the charity galas, the confidence at the dinner table. Evan thought she was just ambitious. I knew ambition when it smelled like greed. I opened my notebook again and flipped to the first page where I'd written step 1, know where every dollar goes. Beneath it, I added a second line, step 2, follow the silence. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing in the quiet. The air in my apartment felt heavier, but not suffocating, more like the stillness before a move in a chess game. This wasn't about punishing her. It was about truth. If she'd built her life on lies, then the numbers would tell me where they started. I spent the next hour combing through the data. Each transaction opened a door to another one. A transfer from Harlow Tech to Willow Consulting. A withdrawal for vendor services that matched no vendor. It was like following footprints in soft mud, subtle but unmistakable. By midnight, I had a small list of names and account numbers. I printed them out, laid them neatly on the table, and stared at them until the ink seemed to pulse under the lamplight. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. The city felt suspended asleep. I looked out the window again, at the rain sliding down the glass. My reflection looked back older, yes, but not beaten. "She thinks I'm irrelevant," I whispered. "That I don't know how the world works." I picked up the pen again and wrote one more note. Step 3. Let them underestimate you. I set the notebook aside, turned off the lamp, and sat in the dark for a while. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. In that silence, I could almost hear Eleanor's voice again, soft and certain. "Don't let pride make you blind." I smiled into the darkness. "No, my love," I said quietly. "This time pride's going to keep my eyes open." When I finally went to bed, the rain was still falling steady and rhythmic. I lay awake tracing my plan in my head. Slow, patient, deliberate. She thought she'd embarrassed me. She thought she'd won. But she had no idea that her laughter had given me exactly what I needed, a reason to start counting again. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. Habit, I suppose. Years of rising early for board meetings and audits had wired my body that way. The city was still half asleep when I brewed my first cup of coffee and opened the curtains. Thin fog hugged the skyline, the kind that made everything look softer than it really was. I liked mornings like this, quiet, precise, unpretentious. the kind of silence you could think clearly in. I sat at my table and opened the folder I'd made the night before. A handful of printed transaction records lay in a neat pile, each line a trail leading somewhere I needed to go. Willow Consulting. I murmured, tracing the company name with my finger. The name was clean polished and fake. I'd seen enough shell companies to recognize one immediately. I sipped my coffee and began my day's work, the kind no one would ever know I was doing. By 8, I was walking into a small downtown cafe that doubled as my quiet workspace. Tom was already there, his gray hair sticking up in a way that made him look perpetually disheveled. He waved me over. "You look like a man who hasn't slept," he said. "Sleeps for people with nothing to solve," I replied, sliding into the booth across from him. He chuckled. "Still the same old numbers, man." I handed him the printed sheets. "You said you had contacts who could trace corporate filings." Tom adjusted his glasses and glanced through the pages. "Yeah. This one, Willow Consulting? It's registered under a tax ID, linked to another entity. Same address, but the registered owner's name is here." He pointed at the line near the bottom. "Leonard Price." I frowned. "Leonard sound familiar, Maya's father," I said slowly. Tom looked up. "You're kidding. I wish I were." We sat in silence for a long moment. Outside, traffic hummed and a streetcar rolled by, its bell faint in the distance. Tom finally said, "So what's the plan? Rich? You want me to dig deeper, or are you going to talk to your son?" "Neither," I said. "Not yet." He leaned back skeptical. "You're not going to tell Evan his wife's running a ghost company with her father?" "Not until I have proof that will survive the light of day," I said. "Right now I just have smoke. I need the fire." Tom nodded slowly. "You've still got that calm killer look, you know," that I smiled faintly. "It's called patience." After he left, I stayed another hour, notebook open, sketching the connections in my neat handwriting. Every time I wrote Maya, I pressed a little harder with the pen. Not from anger, never anger, but from precision. Each move she'd made, every lie, was an entry in a ledger. And soon every entry would need to balance. By noon, I went to see Evan at his office. Harlow Tech had grown since the last time I'd been there. Sleek glass walls, young employees with coffee cups, monitors glowing with endless data. My son looked tired but proud, the kind of exhaustion that comes from responsibility. He smiled when he saw me. "Dad, what brings you here?" "Just wanted to see how my favorite CEO's doing," I said, glancing around. He laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Don't call me that. It's mostly Maya handling the financial side these days." "She's got a knack for it?" "I'll bet she does," I said softly. He didn't notice my tone. "She's been working on restructuring some of our partnerships. Says it'll make the company more efficient. Has she mentioned a firm called Willow Consulting?" Evan blinked. "Willow? Yeah, I think so. They're a new vendor, right? Something like that." He frowned. "Why?" "You've got that look, Dad." "Just curiosity," I said, keeping my voice even. "Old habits die hard." Evan smiled, unaware of what I'd already uncovered. "You worry too much. Maya's smart. She knows what she's doing." I nodded. "I'm sure she does." As I left the building, I felt that familiar heaviness in my chest, the ache of watching your child walk straight into a storm he doesn't know exists. I wanted to protect him, but protection without understanding is just control. He needed to see it himself. That night, I spread the papers across my dining table again. The rain outside had turned steady, pattering against the window in a slow rhythm. I cross-referenced every transfer, building a timeline. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. Maya and her father were siphoning money through dummy accounts, framing them as consulting fees. Clean on paper, dirty in truth. I picked up the phone and called Tom again. I need confirmation of the money flow, dates, recipients, balances. You think she's laundering through the company? He asked. I think she's feeding her own lifestyle while my son works himself to the bone, I replied. He exhaled. You sure you want to go down this road, Rich? This isn't just about money. It's about family. It's always about family, I said. That's why it matters. After the call, I closed my eyes and sat in the stillness. Eleanor's voice came back to me again, soft but firm. Don't let pride make you blind. I whispered back, this isn't pride. It's protection. I wrote another line in the notebook, step 4, protect without warning. The days that followed blurred together, morning coffee, silent research, careful movement. I set up alerts on the accounts, created a private spreadsheet to track the hidden transfers, and stored everything on a flash drive tucked inside an old chest box. No one knew but me. One evening, as I walked home from the market, I saw Evan and Maya through the window of a restaurant. They were laughing, clinking glasses, the perfect couple on the outside. She looked radiant under the golden light, all confidence and charm. Evan looked exhausted. My stomach twisted not from jealousy but from grief. He didn't deserve to be part of her performance. When I got home, I poured myself a drink, just one, and sat staring at the skyline. My reflection in the glass looked older than the city behind it. You called me a filthy old man, I whispered to the night. But you'll learn what kind of man I really am. I opened the notebook one last time that night and wrote, Step 5. When they think you're irrelevant, that's when you're most dangerous. I closed it slowly, slid it into the drawer, and turned off the lights. The city outside kept moving, oblivious to what was coming. The game had already begun, and I was done playing nice. I spent the next few days moving like a man with a secret. Everything I did looked ordinary from the outside, morning coffee, afternoon, walks, phone calls with old friends, but underneath, every minute had purpose. I wasn't angry anymore. I was strategic. The kind of calm that comes right before you make a move no one expects. Tom sent me another batch of records on a Tuesday morning. The file arrived with a short note. You were right. She's been transferring funds through multiple shadow accounts. Be careful, Rich. I printed the documents, laid them out on my kitchen table, and began connecting the dots. The more I read, the clearer the pattern became. Each payment looked small on its own, but together they painted a picture of something deliberate, systematic. Maya wasn't just skimming, she was laundering. The smell of fresh coffee filled the room as I underlined names with a red pen. Leonard Price, her father, appeared again and again. They'd built an entire network of shell companies, tiny forgettables scattered across different states. Classic move. Too clean to raise alarms, too small for federal eyes. But she'd made one mistake. She used my son's company to fund it all. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. You got greedy, Maya, I said softly. Greedy people forget who signs the checks. Later that day, I stopped by the old office building where Tom still consulted part-time. The place smelled of burnt coffee and printer toner nostalgia mixed with fluorescent lighting. Tom met me at the front desk, shaking his head before I even spoke. You're playing with fire, Rich. I built the fire, I replied. He sighed, pushing a folder toward me. Everything's here. Account links, transaction dates, signatures. If this goes public, it'll ruin her and probably your son too. I'm not taking it public, I said. Not yet. Tom's brows furrowed. Then what are you doing? I looked him in the eye. I'm going to let her show the world who she really is. That night I drove to Evan's house. The porch light was on, the way Eleanor always kept ours when she was alive. Evan opened the door, smiling. Dad. This is a surprise. I thought I'd drop by, I said, holding a paper bag. Brought dinner. He grinned, leading me to the kitchen. Maya was there, dressed in her perfect silk blouse, her expression tight when she saw me. "Oh," she said coolly. "Didn't know we were having company." "Neither did I," Evan said, setting the table. "Dad just showed up with Thai food. Thought it'd be nice." I watched her smile a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She sat across from me, pouring herself a glass of wine. "How's retirement treating you?" "Richard, peaceful," I said. "I spend a lot of time looking at numbers. Old habit." Her hand froze for half a second before she recovered. "Still can't let the spreadsheets go, huh?" "Some habits keep you alive," I said evenly. Dinner was pleasant enough on the surface. Evan talked about work, about expanding into new markets, about how proud he was of Maya for streamlining the company's finances. I nodded, pretending to listen, watching the way her eyes flickered whenever money came up. When we were done eating, I offered to take out the trash. In the kitchen, I noticed a stack of unopened envelopes near the counterbank statements. The top one had the Willow Consulting logo printed in the corner. I ran my thumb along the edge, memorizing the account number before slipping it back exactly as I'd found it. Maya appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "Looking for something?" "Just the trash," I said, lifting the bag. She smirked. "You know it's rude to snoop around someone else's house." I smiled. "So is lying to my son." Her eyes darkened. "You're out of line, old man." "Maybe," I said quietly. "But at least I know where the line is." She stepped closer, her perfume heavy and sweet. "You think you're smarter than me? You don't even understand what we're doing." "Evan trusts me. He believes in me." "I'm sure he does," I said, meeting her gaze. "But trust is like credit, it runs out when you spend it too fast." She laughed under her breath, low and cruel. "You wouldn't dare ruin his marriage. You'd lose him forever." "I don't need to ruin anything," I said. "You're doing that yourself." For a second, the mask slipped. Her confidence cracked just enough to show the panic behind it. Then she turned, grabbed her glass, and walked away without another word. I watched her disappear into the living room, her laughter resuming a few seconds later, light and artificial. I stepped outside with the trash, the night air cool and damp. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from control. I wanted to expose her right then, right in front of Evan. But this wasn't about rage. It was about timing. The next morning, I met Tom again at the cafe. He had already printed out everything I'd asked for: the shell companies, the paper trail, even phone logs between Maya and Leonard. "You could hand this to the authorities right now," he said. "They'd tear her apart." "Not yet," I said. "She needs to walk herself into the trap." Tom stared at me. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" "She thinks I'm weak," I said, stirring my coffee. "Let's see how strong she feels when the numbers stop moving." Tom nodded slowly. "You know, I almost pity her." "Don't," I said. "She chose her game. I'm just better at it." That night, I sat at my desk again, the papers spread across the surface like a battlefield map. I drew a line from one account to another, connecting each false company back to her. The web was complete. The only thing left was to pull one thread and watch it collapse. I opened my notebook and wrote in calm, deliberate letters. Step 6. Never strike in anger. Strike in precision. Then beneath it, Step 7. Control the flow, control the power. I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and sat in darkness for a moment. Through the window, I could see the city glowing faintly under the rain. Somewhere across town, Maya was probably celebrating another lie. Letter. The storm hadn't started yet. When I finally went to bed, I felt no rage, no fear, only purpose. She'd humiliated me once. I would teach her what silence could do, and by the time she realized what was happening, it would already be too late. The first real move came on a Thursday morning, quiet and unannounced, just the way I liked it. The sun was pale behind the clouds, the city still waking up. I sat at my desk with a cup of coffee and my notebook open beside me. The plan was already in motion, a chain reaction set to unfold one piece at a time. I didn't need to push. I just needed to let gravity work. I logged into my old network account, the one I'd built years ago for internal audits. It still worked. Funny how people forget to revoke access when you retire politely. I typed slowly, careful not to trigger alerts, then opened the Permissions tab for Harlow Tech's financial dashboard. There it was, Maya's name listed as primary financial administrator. I stared at it for a moment, the words pulsing like a heartbeat on the screen. I clicked once and changed it to temporary review. The system would do the rest, automatically, routine verification, compliance protocols, nothing that would look deliberate. As the system processed, I whispered to the quiet room, "Let the audit begin." At 9 a.m., Tom called. "You sure you want to start this?" "It's already started," I said. He exhaled through the phone. "You always did prefer surgical strikes." "Sloppy work leaves noise," I replied. "I'm not here for noise." By noon, the first signs arrived. Evan called me, his voice tight but polite. "Dad, did you make any changes to the company account settings?" "No," I said evenly. "Why, Maya says her access looks restricted. Some audit notice popped up this morning." "That's strange," I murmured. "Probably an automatic check. Those systems run reviews every few years." He sighed. "Yeah, maybe. She's been on the phone with the bank all morning. Tell her to stay calm," I said, my tone almost kind. The truth always balances out. He didn't catch the meaning, of course. He never did. That afternoon, I met Tom for lunch at a small diner near the harbor. The smell of coffee and fried food filled the air. So he asked, sliding into the booth across from me. "The system flagged her accounts just as expected," I said. "Once the compliance department gets involved, every transaction she's touched will be reviewed. And if they find the fake LLCs..." "They will," I said. "The pattern's too clean. She's been too confident." Tom stirred his coffee, watching me. "You really think this is going to make her realize what she's done?" "I'm not interested in realization," I said quietly. "Only consequence." After lunch, I walked along the harbor, the air sharp with salt and wind. Seagulls cried overhead, swooping between the masts of docked boats. I thought of Eleanor again, how she used to love walking here on weekends, feeding the gulls stale bread from her purse. She'd always said justice was like the tide, patient, inevitable, and merciless in its return. When I got home, I found an email waiting for me. The sender's name made me smile, an old contact from the Financial Oversight Bureau. The subject line read, "Re-request for independent audit approval." I opened it, scanning the message. They'd received the anonymous tip I'd sent 3 days earlier detailing inconsistencies in Harlow Tech's vendor payments. It had been written in neutral language, professional tone, no trace of personal vendetta. It wasn't revenge. It was procedure. That night, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Maya. I let it ring twice before answering. "Richard," she said, her voice tight, almost trembling. "What the hell did you do?" "Excuse me," I said calmly. "The accounts are locked. The bank says there's an audit." Evan's panicking. "They're asking for documentation I can't provide." "That sounds serious," I said. "You should probably talk to your accountant." "Don't play dumb with me," she snapped. "You've been snooping, haven't you? You started this." "I'm retired, Maya," I said softly. "I don't start things anymore. I just watch how they end." She went silent, breathing hard through the phone. Then she hissed, "You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you can ruin me." "I don't need to ruin you," I said. "You've done a fine job yourself." She cursed and hung up. I sat there for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the steady ticking of the old clock above the window. I took another sip of tea and smiled faintly. The next day, Evan called again. This time, his tone carried confusion and worry. "Dad, things are getting complicated. The auditors found irregularities in the vendor payments. They think someone's been diverting funds." I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "And what does Maya say?" "She says it's a misunderstanding. That she's handling it." "Handling it how?" He sighed. "She won't tell me. She said I wouldn't understand." I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. Son, when people start using words like misunderstanding, it usually means they've already run out of explanations. Evan didn't respond. I could hear him breathing, could feel the weight of his silence through the line. "I just want to protect her," he finally said. "I know," I said quietly. "I once wanted to protect someone too. But protection only works if the person deserves it." After we hung up, I went to my balcony. The sky had cleared, and the city glowed under the fading sun. Somewhere out there, Maya was pacing in her expensive living room, her world starting to shrink. She'd built everything on borrowed confidence money that wasn't hers, trust that wasn't earned. Now both were slipping away. I thought about the dinner where she'd called me a filthy old man, about the laughter, the humiliation, the way she'd smiled when she said it. I'd promised myself I wouldn't react then. Now I was keeping that promise. This wasn't rage, it was rhythm. I went back inside, opened my notebook, and wrote a single line under the last entry, step. Let the trap breathe. The city outside pulsed with life, unaware that one woman's empire was crumbling in silence. I closed the notebook, exhaled slowly, and turned off the lights. Justice didn't always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it came quietly, like the sound of a bank account freezing overnight. The first calls came early in the morning. I was pouring coffee when my phone buzzed on the counter. Evan's name glowing on the screen. His voice was tight, breathless. "Dad, something's wrong. Maya's freaking out. Her credit cards aren't working, and the bank froze 2 of our accounts." I kept my tone calm. "Did the bank say why?" "They said it's part of an ongoing audit," he said. "But they can't give details. She's been on the phone for hours. She thinks someone reported her. Reported her for what?" He hesitated. "I don't know. But she's furious." I sipped my coffee and watched the rain slide down the window. "I'm sure it'll sort itself out, son. Sometimes the system just catches up." Evan exhaled, confused, but trusting. "Yeah, maybe." After we hung up, I turned off my phone and stood there in the kitchen for a while, listening to the soft patter of rain. I could almost picture her across town, pacing her marble floors, calling every contact she had, demanding answers that no one could give. The beauty of bureaucracy, it doesn't shout. It strangles slowly. By mid-morning, I took a walk along the pier. The air was crisp and cold, the kind that cleared your thoughts. Boats swayed gently against their ropes, and gulls cried overhead. I felt lighter than I had in months. When my phone buzzed again, I ignored it. I didn't need to hear her voice to know what it would sound like, panic dressed up as anger. Around noon, Tom showed up at the cafe near the waterfront, his coat damp from the drizzle. He slid into the seat across from me. "You look way too relaxed for a man in the middle of a storm." "Storm's not mine," I said. He smirked. "You really did it, huh?" The bank called in the compliance review. They froze every one of her linked accounts, business and personal. I checked the filings myself. "She'll call me soon," I said. "Desperation's predictable." Tom leaned back. "You know, Rich, I've seen you mad before. But this is different." "It's not anger," I said quietly. "It's arithmetic." We talked for a while, mostly about the past, about how simple numbers could ruin people who thought they were untouchable. When he left, I sat for another hour watching people move through the rain with umbrellas, rushing to places that seemed suddenly irrelevant. By the time I got home, my voicemail was full. 3 from Evan, 2 from Maya, 1 from a blocked number that I was sure was her father. I ignored them all. Instead, I lit a small lamp on the desk, took out my notebook, and began writing. Step 9. Silence exposes more than confrontation ever could. My tea was still warm when the phone finally rang again. I let it buzz once, twice, 3 times before I answered. Richard Maya said, her voice trembling just enough to betray her composure. I don't know what you've done, but you need to stop it. I said nothing. The banks are frozen. The cards don't work. Even my company account is under review. You think this is funny? No, I said softly. I think it's overdue. She sucked in a breath. You can't just do this. You're not God. Neither are you, I said. You've just been pretending. Her tone shifted, anger fading into fear. Evan doesn't know. He's going to find out, and when he does, you'll destroy him. I'm not destroying him, I said. I'm protecting him from you. You arrogant bastard, she hissed. Do you really think freezing my accounts makes you powerful? No, I said. It makes you visible. For a moment, there was only silence on the line. Then she hung up. I set the phone down gently and leaned back in my chair. The quiet that followed was deep satisfying. Not triumphant, but clean. The next day, Evan came to see me in person. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, hair disheveled. Dad, he said, sitting heavily in the chair across from me. I don't know what's happening. Maya's panicking. The auditors are asking questions I can't answer. What kind of questions? About shell accounts, vendor transfers, things I've never seen before. They said the company's name is linked to multiple fake entities. Maya swears it's all a misunderstanding. Do you believe her? He looked down at his hands. I don't know. I want to. I poured him some tea the same way Eleanor used to when he was a boy. Sometimes wanting to believe someone is the most dangerous kind of faith. He nodded but didn't respond. The weight of doubt was settling in. That was good. Doubt makes people look closer. And once you look close enough, the truth can't hide. That night I sat by the window again, the city lights blurred by rain. My reflection stared back at me, older, yes, but steady. I thought about what Eleanor would say if she saw me now. Probably that I'd gone too far. But she'd also know why I couldn't stop. Some lessons don't come cheap, and Maya had been living off discounts for too long. The next morning, Tom called again. The audit expanded, he said. They found connections to her father's company. The compliance office sent it to federal review. Good, I said. You know this could ruin her entirely, right? She did that the day she called me a filthy old man, I said. Tom was quiet for a moment. You ever feel bad about it? Every day, I admitted. But that doesn't mean it's wrong. After I hung up, I walked to the window and looked down at the street. A delivery truck splashed through puddles, and 2 kids ran across the crosswalk, laughing oblivious. Life goes on even when the world tilts for someone else. I went back to my desk, opened the notebook, and added one last note under Step 9. Step 10. Let panic do the rest. Then I closed it carefully, turned off the lamp, and sat in the dim light of the room. Somewhere across town, Maya was realizing that the walls weren't closing in by accident. They'd been built that way all along. And in the quiet hum of my apartment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The morning came cold and bright sunlight glinting off the wet pavement outside my apartment. I sat at my desk with a fresh cup of tea, my notebook open, the words from last night still sharp in my mind. Step 10. Let panic do the rest. I didn't have to lift a finger now. The system was already moving, grinding forward with the same quiet precision I'd spent my career perfecting. Justice, after all, works best when you let it run its own calculations. The phone rang just after 9. I knew it would. Maya never let a crisis go unanswered for long. I waited 2 rings before picking up. Her voice burst through the line like static. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you can ruin me?" I stirred my tea, watching the ripples. "Good morning to you too, Maya." "This is harassment," she snapped. "Do you know what they're saying?" The auditors froze everything. Our accounts, my business, even my savings. "I can't pay my employees, Richard." I don't see how that's my problem," I said calmly. "Maybe it's just the system making sure everything adds up." "You're the one who started this," she screamed. "You went to the bank, didn't you? You filed some kind of complaint." "I didn't have to," I said softly. "Numbers talk on their own. Maybe they finally told the truth." There was a pause on the line, a long breath of silence where I could almost hear her heart racing. Then came the sound of her voice breaking sharp and bitter. "You're a monster." "No," I said. "I'm an accountant." She hung up. I sat there for a moment, letting the quiet return. Outside, the sky had cleared completely. The air shimmered the kind of cold that feels clean. I finished my tea, grabbed my coat, and decided to take a walk. Down by the waterfront, the gulls circled above the docks. Fishermen were shouting to each other, loading their nets. It was the kind of ordinary noise I used to take for granted. I walked slowly, my hands in my pockets, and thought about balance, how everything sooner or later returns to it. By noon, Tom called. His tone was lighter than usual. "She's coming apart, Rich. Her father tried to move some funds this morning, instant freeze. The federal compliance systems flagged everything connected to those accounts. She's done." "Good," I said quietly. "Let it breathe." "You sure you don't want to gloat?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Gloating wastes energy. I prefer observation. Man, you really are ice cold." "Not cold," I said. "Just finished." After we hung up, I kept walking past the marina and the old clock tower. Every step felt like shedding weight I didn't know I'd been carrying. For months she'd chipped away at my patience, my dignity, my son's trust. Now the silence she'd mocked had turned into her own undoing. Later that afternoon, I got a text from Evan. "Dad, she's losing it. I don't know what to do." I typed back, "Do nothing. Let the truth show itself." He didn't reply. That evening, I went home and found my old chessboard in the closet. Eleanor had given it to me on our 10th anniversary, saying it suited me, a man who moves slowly, but never without reason. I set up the pieces on the table, white against black, order against chaos. I made the first move, then stopped staring at the board. The queen always looked powerful, but in the end, it was the quiet pawns that decided the game. The phone buzzed again around 6. It was Evan this time, voice strained. "Dad, Maya's losing her mind. She says someone sabotaged her reputation. She's been calling every lawyer she knows. Did you ask her why the accounts were frozen? She keeps saying it's a misunderstanding." I leaned back in my chair. "Do you still believe her?" There was a pause. "I don't know what to believe anymore." "Then stop believing," I said, gently. "Start looking." He went silent, and for a while I thought the call had dropped. Then he said quietly, "I think you know something you're not telling me." "I know that truth doesn't need to be told," I said. "It reveals itself when it's ready." He sighed heavily. "I'll call you later." After he hung up, I looked out the window. The city glowed in the dusk, golden and distant. Somewhere in that maze of lights, Maya was probably pacing her living room, her perfect world unraveling piece by piece. Tom called again just before sunset. "Rich, you should see this," he said. "She's all over the news feeds. Word got out about the frozen accounts. Someone leaked the audit notice." "I didn't leak anything," I said. "I know. The system did. Standard transparency policy." He chuckled. "Guess she didn't read the fine print." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The sound of waves against the pier outside filled the silence between us. Rich, Tom said softly, "You did what you had to do. Don't let it eat you." "I'm not," I said. "But she will." When night fell, I turned off the lights and sat by the window again. The air inside the apartment was cool still, carrying the faint scent of tea. I could see my reflection in the glass, older, calmer, but sharper than before. The city outside was alive, but for me time felt suspended. The notebook lay open beside me, the ink from my last entry still dark. I took up my pen and wrote Step 11, the trap tightens itself. Then I put the pen down and closed my eyes. I could almost hear Eleanor's voice again, soft and amused. "You always did like slow revenge." "I never liked it," I whispered. "I just learned how to make it quiet." The phone buzzed one last time before I went to bed. It was a message from Tom. She tried to move money under another name. The system caught it instantly. "She's done." I smiled to myself, a small, tired smile that wasn't victory, just relief. The silence around me felt different now, not empty, not heavy, balanced. When I finally turned off the lamp, the city lights flickered across the window pane like tiny signals of closure. She had thought calling me weak would make her untouchable. But the truth was simple. I didn't need strength to win. Just patience. And patience, when paired with silence, is the most dangerous weapon of all. The morning light poured through Maya's kitchen window, too bright for the kind of day she was having. She sat at the table wrapped in her silk robe, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. The espresso machine hissed and sputtered behind her, forgotten. Her reflection in the black screen looked different, harder, smaller. When she finally dared to check her banking app again, the screen blinked once before flashing the same message she'd seen all week, account restricted pending audit review. She slammed the phone onto the counter. "No, no, no," she whispered almost to herself. Her credit card bills sat unopened in a pile next to the half-eaten toast. When she tried to pay one online, another message appeared. Transaction declined. The noise from the next room made her jump. Evan walked in, jacket half-zipped, eyes bleary from another sleepless night. "I just got off the phone with the auditors," he said quietly. "They're expanding the investigation." Maya's voice cracked. "They're making a mistake. This isn't about me. It's your father, he's behind this." Evan rubbed his temples. "Maya, you've been saying that for days." "Why would my dad?" "Because he hates me," she snapped. "He's always hated me. He's doing this to get back at me, to make me look like some kind of criminal." Evan shook his head slowly. "The auditors don't work for him." She glared at him, her breathing shallow. "You don't understand. He's manipulating you all of this. I understand that something's wrong," he interrupted. "And I'm starting to wonder what you're not telling me." The silence that followed was suffocating. Maya's throat tightened, but she forced herself to smile, that brittle smile she'd mastered over the years. "You think I'd lie to you?" Evan didn't answer. He grabbed his keys and left. She stood alone in the quiet kitchen, her pulse hammering. For the first time, the house felt unfamiliar, cold, too big, like it belonged to someone else. Across town, I sat by the window of my apartment, watching the sunlight slide across the skyline. My tea had gone cold, but I didn't move. I already knew how the morning was unfolding for her. The pattern was predictable. The panic always came first. Then the denial. Then the silence. My phone buzzed once. A text from Tom Audit confirmed. Her father's accounts flagged too. It's unraveling fast. I stared at the message for a moment before replying. Let it run. Then I closed the phone, leaned back, and watched the city breathe. People on the street below hurried through their lives, unaware that somewhere above them, a woman who thought she could buy control was learning what it felt like to lose it completely. Later that morning, Maya's car screeched into the parking lot outside Harlow Tech. She stormed inside, past the receptionist, straight to Evan's office. "You need to call the bank," she said, slamming the door behind her. "You have to tell them this is a mistake." Evan looked up from his desk, startled. "Maya, calm down." "Don't tell me to calm down." They froze the company's operational account. His expression shifted, confusion and worry blending into something darker. "The company account, yes. They said the funds are under review due to irregular transfers." "They're accusing us of fraud, Evan." "Fraud." He stood slowly. "And why would they say that?" She hesitated, the words catching in her throat. "Because someone reported false information about me." Evan's jaw tightened. Or maybe someone wasn't honest in the first place. Her face went pale. "You don't actually think I think," he said, voice steady, "that my father warned me about people who confuse trust with opportunity." She stared at him, tears filling her eyes, but never falling. "You're choosing him over me." "I'm choosing the truth," he said. When she left the office, her steps were unsteady, her perfect composure cracking like thin glass. That evening, I sat on a bench overlooking Union Lake, the air cool against my face. The water was calm, a mirror reflecting the fading light. I'd always come here when I needed to think. I took out my notebook, flipped past the earlier pages, and wrote, "Step 11, let reality do the talking." I stayed there until the first streetlights flickered on. When I finally headed home, I stopped at a bakery to pick up a loaf of bread. The woman behind the counter smiled warmly, the smell of cinnamon and sugar filling the air. Simple honesty, ordinary decency. The things Maya had traded away for status. When I got back to my apartment, the message light on my phone was blinking. 3 missed calls. Evan, then Maya, then an unknown number. I pressed play. Maya's voice filled the room, shaky and furious. "You did this." "I know you did. You think this makes you strong? You think you're teaching me some kind of lesson? You don't know who you're dealing with, Richard. You're going to regret this." The voicemail ended with the sound of her sobbing. I deleted it without replaying. Then I picked up the phone and called Evan. He answered on the first ring. His voice was heavy. "She's falling apart, Dad. I don't know what to do." "Let her," I said softly. "Sometimes people need to hit the bottom before they can see where they really stand." He was quiet for a moment. "You sound like you planned this." "I didn't plan her choices," I said. "Just her consequences." He didn't speak again, and for a while all I could hear was his breathing. Then he said, "I think I need to see things for myself." "That's the only way to really understand," I told him. After we hung up, I turned off the lights and sat in the glow of the city. The sound of the rain outside had softened to a gentle hiss. I opened my notebook again and wrote one last line under the day's notes, Step 12. When truth arrives, it doesn't knock, it walks in. I closed the book, exhaled, and looked out across the skyline. The storm was over. All that was left now was the wreckage it had revealed. And somewhere out there, a woman who once thought she could humiliate me was finally learning that the most dangerous revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's silent. It's patient. And it always arrives on time. The email hit her inbox at exactly 8:42 a.m. Maya hadn't even finished her coffee when she opened it and froze. The subject line read, Audit Report Compliance Summary. Her hand trembled as she clicked. Page after page filled the screen. Transaction logs, company transfers, vendor payments, all marked in red. Every single one connected to her. Her breath caught. Attached at the bottom was a file labeled Willow Consulting Owner Verification. She opened it, and there it was. Her own signature, her name tied directly to the shell accounts she'd built to siphon money. Her pulse thudded in her ears. No, she whispered. No, that's impossible. The phone rang. It was Evan. She hesitated, then answered. I just got the report, he said, his voice steady but tight. Tell me it's not true. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't form. Evan, listen, this isn't what it looks like. I was just trying to what he cut her off. To fix something or to steal from me. Her eyes darted across the kitchen. You don't understand. It was just temporary. Your father, he's twisting everything. He wants to turn you against me. Stop blaming him, Evan said. These are your accounts, your transfers, your signature. I saw them myself. Tears welled in her eyes, but even she didn't believe her own denial anymore. I did it for us, she said, finally, voice cracking. For our future. Evan's tone was quiet now, almost calm. You did it for yourself. The line went dead. Across town, I sat in my armchair, the morning paper untouched beside me. My phone buzzed once Tom's message, she's cornered. He knows. I exhaled slowly, letting the quiet sink in. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, not really. It was stillness. The kind that comes after a storm has taken everything it was meant to. Outside, rain began to fall again, tapping softly against the window. I opened my notebook, found the last page, and wrote, Step 13. Let truth do what anger never could. Evan showed up that evening. He didn't call ahead. When I opened the door, his face looked hollow, his eyes tired in a way that went beyond exhaustion. He walked in without a word and sat on the couch. I poured 2 cups of tea and waited. She admitted it, he said finally. Not at first, but when I showed her the proof, she broke down. I nodded. And now she's packing. Said she'll leave tonight. I studied him. Do you believe she's sorry? He hesitated, then shook his head. No. She's just sorry she got caught. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. I remembered when he was a boy, how he'd sit at this same table doing his math homework while Eleanor baked in the kitchen. He'd always been patient, deliberate, careful with numbers. But people he'd trusted too easily. Dad, he said finally, his voice breaking. How did you know I looked out the window before answering? Because people who lie always leave fingerprints in the math. The numbers don't bend, even when hearts do. He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. I feel like such a fool. You're not, I said. You're just kind. And kindness doesn't make you weak, son. It just makes you human. He covered his face with his hands, taking a deep breath. She said you destroyed her life. I took a sip of tea. She destroyed her own life. I just made sure she couldn't destroy yours too. Evan's hands dropped into his lap. His voice was quiet but certain. You were right, Dad. About everything. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Later that night, I got another message from Tom. She's trying to move money again through a relative's account. The system flagged it immediately. I smiled faintly. Let it finish, I wrote back. At 11 p.m., my phone buzzed again, this time a call. It was Evan. His tone was steady, almost eerily so. She's gone, he said. She admitted everything. Even the fake medical bills, the fabricated family emergencies, all of it. And her father. He's in on it, Evan said. She told me he set it up years ago. They used me as a cover. I closed my eyes for a moment. I'm sorry, son. Don't be, he said. You saved me. The call ended, and I sat there in the dim light, the hum of the city outside, faint but steady. For the first time in months, the air in my apartment felt lighter. I walked over to the window, looking down at the street. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement shining under the streetlights. I could see my reflection faintly in the glass, older-lined, but calm. I thought of Eleanor again. You can't control everything, Richard. Sometimes all you can do is protect what's left. I did, Ellie, I murmured. I protected him. The next morning, the newspaper headlines confirmed it. Local couple investigated for financial fraud, assets frozen. I read the article once, then folded the paper neatly and set it aside. It didn't bring joy or relief, just quiet certainty. Tom called later that day. It's over, he said. She's facing charges. The auditors finished their report. Your son's in the clear. Good, I said. You gonna tell him it was you? I thought about that for a moment. No, let him believe it was justice. You really are a ghost in the system, Tom said, laughing softly. Ghosts don't haunt, I said. They just remind people what they've buried. That night, Evan came by again. He didn't say much, just sat across from me with a distant look in his eyes. I can't stop thinking about how she looked when she realized it was over, he said. People only look honest when they run out of lies, I said. He nodded slowly. I guess so. He stood to leave, and before he reached the door, he turned. Dad, thank you. I smiled faintly. Don't thank me. Just live better than the people who lied to you. When the door closed behind him, I turned back to my desk and opened the notebook one last time. Beneath my final note, I wrote Step 14. When the truth stands, you don't have to. I closed it, slid it into the drawer, and turned off the light. Outside, the city lights flickered against the wet streets, steady and endless. Somewhere out there, Maya was facing a reckoning she'd written for herself. And here in my quiet apartment, I finally felt what she never would, peace. The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. It came down in sheets that blurred the skyline and washed the city clean, or maybe just tried to. I sat by the window with a mug of coffee, watching the droplets race down the glass. The quiet felt different now. Not the heavy kind that follows loss, but the kind that comes when the noise finally ends. Maya had disappeared from the headlines almost as quickly as she'd appeared. The story had burned bright for a week, socialite tied to financial fraud scandal. Then it vanished beneath the next wave of scandal and gossip. The system had done its work. The world had moved on. Evan came by that morning, his coat soaked his eyes, tired but clear. He stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking. It's official, he said. The investigation's over. Maya's accounts are frozen for good. She's lost everything. I nodded slowly. And you? He shrugged. I'm still standing. The company's safe. The auditors cleared my name completely. They said the fraud was isolated. Good, I said. You deserve that. He looked at me for a long time before speaking again. She left town, packed what little she could, and took off yesterday. No forwarding address. I didn't say anything. I just turned toward the window. The reflection of my face stared back, older-lined, but calm. Evan sat down on the couch and let out a long breath. I keep asking myself if I missed the signs, if I could have stopped it. You couldn't have, I said. People like her don't trip once and fall. They build their own cliffs. He smiled faintly. That sounds like something Mom would have said. I chuckled. She said a lot of things worth remembering. We talked for a while about work, about how he was rebuilding the company's trust, about how he'd moved out of the house he'd shared with Maya. Every word he spoke sounded heavier, but steadier too. He wasn't the same man he'd been a few months ago. That naive certainty had faded, replaced by something quieter and stronger. When he finally left, I stayed by the window, watching him walk down the street. He moved like a man carrying both loss and relief in the same bag. That night, I cooked myself dinner. Simple things, just pasta and a slice of bread. The radio played softly in the background, a jazz station Eleanor used to love. I let the music fill the room, warm and familiar. Then I turned the dial off, mid-song. Silence suited me better now. I thought about Maya, wherever she was. Maybe sitting in a cheap motel, maybe staring at her reflection in a mirror that no longer flattered her. The thought didn't bring satisfaction, only inevitability. People like her always run out of mirrors eventually. The next morning, Tom dropped by. He looked more rested than I'd seen him in months. "You look peaceful," he said, hanging his coat on the rack. "I am," I said, "for the first time in a long while." He grinned. "You know, Rich, if there was an Olympic event for quiet revenge, you'd take gold." I smiled. I didn't want revenge, Tom. I wanted balance. He sat down, nodding. Balance is underrated. We drank coffee and talked about everything except the one thing that hung between us. Then before he left, he said quietly, "She'll never recover from this." "You know that, right?" "I know," I said. "But maybe she'll learn something before she disappears completely." Tom paused at the door. "You think she's capable of that?" "I think people surprise you when they have nothing left to lose," I said. After he left, I took my notebook from the drawer. The edges were worn, the pages full. Every step, every line of strategy, every quiet decision, it was all there. I flipped to the last page and stared at the blank space, waiting for one final entry. Step 15. When the storm passes, don't chase the thunder. I put the pen down and closed the book. Later that afternoon, Evan called again. His voice was softer this time. No tension, no anger. "Dad, I wanted you to know I'm moving into a smaller place. Closer to work, starting over." "That's good," I said. "Starting small is how you build something real." He hesitated. "You know, I used to think your silence meant you didn't care. And now I think it meant you cared too much." For a moment I couldn't speak. "Your mother would be proud of you," I said finally. He laughed quietly. "You always say that when you're proud." "Maybe," I said, "but it's still true." After the call, I stood by the window again. The rain had stopped, leaving the city glistening under a pale sun. The world outside looked washed clean, at least for a little while. That evening, as I sat with a cup of tea, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Maya stood there. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled, and her eyes hollow. For a moment, neither of us said anything. "You got what you wanted?" she said finally, her voice low. "I hope it was worth it." I studied her for a long moment. It wasn't about wanting anything I said. It was about ending what never should have started. She laughed bitterly. "You sound just like him. Your son. Cold and righteous." "No," I said. "He's better than both of us. You just never gave him the chance to be." Her mouth trembled, but she didn't cry. She just looked at me like someone staring at the last open door before it closes. "You ruined me. You did that yourself," I said. "All I did was stop pretending I didn't see it." For a second, she looked like she might say something more. Then she just turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the wet pavement until the sound disappeared into the street. I closed the door quietly. The clock on the wall ticked once, twice. I poured another cup of tea and sat at the table staring at the notebook. It felt heavier now, not because of the pages, but because of everything it carried. Justice once served doesn't disappear. It lingers in the silence afterward, reminding you of what it cost. When I finally went to bed, the city was quiet. No more calls, no more headlines, no more noise. Just the steady rhythm of rain beginning again against the glass. I closed my eyes and let it fall. Justice had finished its work, and for the first time in years, so had I. The months after Maya's departure felt like a long exhale I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The air in my apartment grew lighter. The silence no longer pressed on my chest. It settled warm and steady, like an old friend taking its seat again. The world outside went on buses, hissed past coffee shops, filled spring returned. And for once, I didn't feel like time was running ahead of me. It felt like it had finally slowed down to my pace. Evan visited every Sunday. He brought groceries sometimes, dinner, always stories. Stories about the office, the new contracts his team starting to trust him again. At first he spoke cautiously, as if guilt still clung to every word. But little by little the tension began to fade from his voice. One Sunday, he came in smiling for the first time in months. "I've been promoted," he said, setting a brown paper bag on the counter. "Senior operations manager. They said I handled the whole situation with integrity." I raised my tea in a quiet toast. "That's because you did." He looked around the apartment, then met my eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad." I smiled. "You would have found your way, eventually," maybe he said, sitting across from me. "But I might have been too late." We ate in comfortable silence for a while. The smell of roasted chicken and herbs filled the small kitchen. It reminded me of Sundays long before the kind when Eleanor was still alive, and laughter came easy. When we finished, Evan leaned back in his chair, looking thoughtful. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "What?" "Taking things into your own hands, freezing her accounts, setting everything in motion." I thought about it for a long moment before answering. "No, I don't regret stopping her. But I regret that it had to come to that." He nodded slowly. "She sent me an email last week. I put my cup down." "What did it say?" "She apologized. Said she's in Arizona now, staying with a friend. She asked for forgiveness." "And what did you do?" "I deleted it," he said simply. "I don't hate her, but I can't let her back in my life." I looked at him then, not the way a father looks at a son, but the way one man looks at another who's finally found his footing. "That's not hate, Evan. That's healing." He smiled faintly, eyes glimmering in the late afternoon light. "You sound like Mom." I chuckled. She always was the wise one. After he left, I sat by the window and watched the sunset paint the sky in streaks of gold and gray. The city was quieter now, calmer. I thought of all the noise that used to fill my head, fear, anger, humiliation, and how it had been replaced by something simpler. Peace. Not triumph, not joy, just peace. A week later, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten. The return address was Arizona. I knew who it was before I opened it. The handwriting was elegant, but shaky. "Richard," it began, "I know you'll probably tear this up before reading it, but I have to try. I lost everything, my money, my home, my reputation, but losing Evan was the worst of all. I thought I could rebuild my life on lies, but they were sand and you were the tide that washed them away. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say I finally understand what I did. You were right to stop me. You protected him when I couldn't even protect myself from my greed. If there's any justice left, it's that you still have your son, and I have to live with knowing I almost took that from you. Maya. I folded the letter once then again and slipped it into my desk drawer. I didn't hate her anymore either. Hate was too heavy, and I'd carried enough of that for one lifetime. That evening, I walked to the park near the harbor. The same bench where I used to sit when all of this began was still there. The wood was more weathered now, the paint chipped. I sat down watching the water shimmer under the fading light. A family walked by a little boy on a scooter, his mother calling after him, laughing. I smiled. Life had a way of circling back to simplicity when you let it. Tom called later that night. "Got a minute always," I said. He chuckled. "You sound like a retired monk these days. Just a man who's had enough of noise." He grew serious. "You did good, Rich. Most people would have lashed out. You stayed measured. You let the truth do the work. I just learned patience," I said, "and silence." "That's rarer than you think," he replied. After the call, I poured myself a glass of wine, just one, and turned on the old record player Eleanor had loved. The needle crackled softly, and the first notes of her favorite jazz record filled the room. I sat there with my eyes closed, letting the music wrap around me. When the record ended, I went to my desk and opened my notebook one last time. The pages were filled now. Steps, reflections, lessons. I turned to the final page and wrote in slow, deliberate strokes. Step 16. True revenge is not about destruction. It's about restoration. Then I closed it for good. Before going to bed, I stood by the window and watched the city lights flicker in the distance. Somewhere out there, Maya was living a different life, smaller, humbler, maybe even honest. And somewhere else, my son was building something new, something real. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even proud. Just still. For the first time in years, I whispered a quiet prayer before turning off the light. Not for victory, not for justice, but for peace. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is simply knowing that you survived everything meant to break you and came out wiser, stronger, and still standing. 2 years passed before I realized I'd stopped counting the time since everything had happened. Life had fallen back into its quiet rhythm. Early walks, morning tea, the occasional phone call from Evan, and evenings spent with the hum of the city outside my window. The chaos that had once filled our lives had become a distant echo, something I could look back on without bitterness, only understanding. Evan came by one Saturday morning carrying a box of pastries and a kind of peace in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. He looked healthier now, steadier. "Dad," he said as he set the box on the table, "I have some news." I raised an eyebrow. "Good or bad?" He smiled. "Depends on how you take it. I met someone." The words hung there for a moment. I felt the faintest flicker of tension, that old instinct to protect him, to weigh every detail before I allowed myself to feel relief. "Tell me about her," I said. "Her name's Lauren. We work together. He stopped for a moment, searching for the right words. Different. Honest. Real. No pretense, no games." I smiled. "That's already better than what you started with." He laughed. "Yeah. I think you'll like her. She's grounded. She even asked about you. Me." He nodded. "She said any man who could stay calm through all that must have something worth learning from." I chuckled softly. "Tell her that's just age, not wisdom." But inside I felt something shift, a small but powerful sense of gratitude. Not because he'd found someone new, but because he'd found the courage to trust again. That was something I'd worried he might never recover. A month later, he brought her over for dinner. Lauren was polite, soft-spoken, but sharp. She had the kind of warmth that didn't need words to fill a room. Over dinner, she asked gentle questions about my life, my work, even Eleanor. She didn't flinch when the past came up. She just listened like someone who understood that people are made from both their scars and their grace. When they left that night, Evan hugged me longer than usual. "You were right about her," I said. He grinned. "You haven't even said anything yet." "I didn't have to," I said. "I saw it in the way you looked at her. That's how your mother used to look at me." For the first time in a long while, I slept without waking in the middle of the night. No dreams, no ghosts, just rest. The next few months passed quietly. Evan and Lauren grew closer, and I found myself visiting them sometimes, their small apartment filled with laughter and the smell of home-cooked meals. It was simple, honest, the kind of life I'd always hoped he'd have. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset from their balcony, Evan turned to me. "You know, Dad, I used to hate what happened with Maya. I thought it ruined me. But now, I think it saved me." I nodded slowly. Pain has a strange way of cleaning out what doesn't belong. He smiled. "You really believe that, don't you?" "I do," I said, "because it's the only reason I'm still standing." A few weeks later, a small envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a check, $500, and a handwritten note. "For what I took that wasn't mine. I've started over. I'm working now honestly this time. Thank you for stopping me when I couldn't stop myself." It wasn't signed, but I knew the handwriting instantly. I didn't cash the check. I tucked it into the same drawer that held her last letter and the notebook where I'd written all my steps. I didn't forgive her completely, not in words, but I realized I didn't need to. Forgiveness, I'd learned, isn't about absolving someone else. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of what they did. That night, I sat by the window again. The same place where I'd watched rain and ruin 2 years before. The city outside looked different now. Less harsh, more human. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear music drifting up from a nearby park, a slow, familiar tune. I smiled, thinking of Eleanor. She'd always said life was like a record. You can't stop the scratches, but the song still plays. When Evan called later that evening, his voice was bright. "Dad, we've got news. What is it this time?" He laughed. "Lauren's pregnant." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, and I felt something in me settle even deeper than peace, something like grace. "Congratulations, son," I said finally. "Your mother would have been over the moon," he chuckled. "She's probably the reason we're this lucky." After the call, I sat there for a long while, the city lights flickering like distant stars. The world had a way of repairing itself if you gave it time, and didn't interfere too much. I opened my old notebook one last time. The final page was blank, except for the faint outline of the last note I'd written months before. True revenge is not about destruction. It's about restoration. I picked up the pen and wrote beneath it. Step 17. When love returns, let it. Then I closed it, slipped it into the drawer with the letter and the check, and turned off the lamp. The next morning, I walked down to the park with a thermos of tea. The air was cool and smelled like wet grass. I found my usual bench by the water and sat there watching people pass, young couples, joggers, children, laughing. The same world I'd nearly lost myself in, now somehow whole again. I thought about how it had all started with a cruel word at a dinner table, a humiliation that cut deeper than it should have. But that night had been a beginning, disguised as an ending. Every insult, every betrayal, every quiet decision I'd made after had led me here to peace, to truth, to balance. I sipped my tea, leaned back, and smiled. If anyone had told me years ago that silence would be my greatest weapon, I wouldn't have believed them. But now, looking at the life I'd rebuilt, the son I'd saved, and the family beginning again, I knew better. The world doesn't reward noise. It rewards patience. And sometimes revenge isn't about proving you were strong. It's about living long enough to see that you never had to prove it at all. As the sun climbed higher and the light caught on the lake's surface, I whispered one final thought to the wind, a quiet promise maybe to Eleanor, maybe to myself. "It's over now," I said, and I did it right. Then I sat there a little longer, letting the morning unfold, the world still turning quiet and whole. If anyone ever asks what justice looks like, I'll tell them it's this, not fire, not fury, just peace, and a life rebuilt from the silence of a man who refused to break. If this story meant something to you, I'd say don't forget to leave a comment, share it, and subscribe. Because sometimes the smallest stories hold the loudest truths.